Sight unseen.
I'm Adam Lisagor. I started a company called Sandwich Video initially in 2009, unofficially, 2010. And the reason I started a company was that the iPhone had come out, the iPhone App Store had come out soon after. Twitter was around. All of these things were brand new in the tech landscape. And a friend and I worked on an app called Birdhouse together. And Birdhouse was specifically for creative writing on Twitter. Sort of uh, caring more about your writing process and drafting and writing something funny and clever and creative, and then publishing it directly to Twitter before copy and paste was available on iPhone, if you can imagine. So we made that app. I made a commercial for it because I have a filmmaking and visual effects background. The commercial for Birdhouse got a ton of attention. The app had its niche audience, but surprisingly, startups and big tech companies started getting in touch right away for me to do similar work for them. So before I knew it, I had started my own production company, Creative Studio, with myself on camera as talent a lot, and I was not expecting to be doing that because I had resigned myself to being either behind the camera or behind a computer. Um, but yeah, and since then I've just become an entrepreneur, serial founder, working in tech now. 15 years later, Sandwich Video is still going strong. Nice, wonderful team in Los Angeles, headquartered in downtown in the Arts District, and always open for what's coming next.
That's awesome. Wow. So there's a lot to dig into there. Do you feel like you're always destined to get into the entrepreneur side of things? Was that always going to happen?
Good question. I had my dad as a sort of not a mentor, but an interesting inspiration, and not in my field. He was a pediatric dentist when I was growing up. But early on, when I was about 5, we went to Disneyland, and he took me on Space Mountain, and he saw how I had reacted to that ride and that experience. And I said something like, reportedly, I said something like, that was so fun, I never want to do it again. And he had that became a moment of inspiration for him to sort of redesign his dental practice for kids in the format of a space adventure. So he then set to work building a spaceship dentist practice with multiple offices, and he hired production designers to do the interior design. And Star Wars was big in the zeitgeist at the time. So that was like this moment of a creative opportunity that came unexpectedly. And I think he was otherwise doing something very rote and standard, which is dentistry, but it was the ingenuity and the creative thinking that sort of solved a business problem for him in a big way. And I think without me having known that that was going to be so defining in my early life, I sort of patterned my own business thinking after that as well. So that's probably what got me going in an entrepreneurial direction, but I didn't think that I was going to be doing something similar. I was going to be a filmmaker. I went to film school at NYU. Um, and it was when I was working for a commercial production company in New York City after I graduated. And I just saw they had a huge problem, which is the guy who handed off the job to me. He had been keeping records of every video reel he'd been sending out to ad agencies. He'd been handwriting it down in a notebook. And then I had sales reps coming to me and being like, what did we send to this agency and what was on that tape? And I'd be like, I don't know, man, this system sucks. So I started cracking open FileMaker Pro, and I taught myself FileMaker. I taught myself a lot of FileMaker, giant relational stuff. And that was my first taste of really building solutions creatively with software. And I did a big pitch to the bosses to help fund, like, basically building out a whole tool set for the company to work with. and they were all very impressed. And I was like, ooh, maybe there's something here. Maybe I like that feeling. I like the taste of building something with software, having it solve a problem for people.
Interesting. So let me ask you this. I took a look at Sandwich. I wasn't familiar with it, but certainly familiar with the clients. And it really punches you in the eyeball with creativity. Like, okay, I'm looking at some really creative stuff here. So I want to ask you, what is creativity?
Creativity is drawing connections between things that aren't typically connected. Foundationally, that's what it is. It's we all model our understanding of a world based on set expectations. Creativity is the freedom to do that, but break expectations a little bit. Because the way humans think is we need patterns. We rely on patterns to help us predict what's going to happen next so we can avoid threats and we can stay safe. When you come to a place where your foundational understanding of the world is such that you know you're going to be safe, then you have a little bit more freedom, and I might call it privilege, to break those expectations and break those predictions and take a little bit of risk to refactor your understanding of the world, because magical things might happen. And I think there's a biological imperative here as well. When you mutate the world a little bit and you try things different, the results, the rewards might be great. Risk and reward, right? So I think creativity is this inherent understanding that humans have for breaking patterns, taking risk, and then experiencing reward, even in either in the form of joy, the joy of creation, or the reward of more material, more material reward.
Yeah. Okay. I want to ping this idea off of you. I've been kind of mulling this over in my head. I feel like there's something that only I can create and something that only you can create. But I don't feel like everyone is doing that thing, because of your experience or your interests or whatever it might be. But maybe you're just, paying the bills or whatever, and you're not like lined up with that thing that maybe isn't going to exist if you don't bring it into reality. You know what I mean? Do you feel like that? And how important is it for people to sort of pursue that thing that only they can do?
I 100% feel that way. And if you have that feeling, then you should pursue it. I think one of the biggest mistakes that you can make as a thinker, not even necessarily as a creative person, but as a thinker, is assuming that somebody else has the same idea, or a lot of people have the same idea as you, and they're going to execute it the same way as you would. So why bother? That's such an easy trap to fall into. For your audience, I'm sure 99.9% of them resonate, or that idea resonates with them. That it's this cognitive bias that we have, that we assume that the rest of the world is exactly like us, and we assume that everybody else thinks like us. We assume that if we have a special idea, oh, why bother? Because somebody else had that special idea too. Or we assume even that at a baseline, other people think precisely like us. And of course, why wouldn't we think that? Because we have a data set of one, in terms of like evidence of how a person thinks. I'm only conscious of my own consciousness. It turns out that's not true. Like we all have a very different experience of the world, and that's beautiful. And so even if it's true that somebody else has had the idea that you've had, which quite often it's not going to be identical. And there's a strong chance that what you create with that idea is very different and more valuable in its own way than what somebody else creates. So 100,000% pursue that idea, even if somebody else is going to as well.
Yeah. Do you think that you could think of it sort of like a frontier? Like there's some frontier that nobody else has visited and you have the chance to go there and like report back. I don't know if that dovetails into like what you do at Sandwich, because there's some inherent value in being creative and finding that uniqueness. I feel like there's something about bringing that unique angle, like there's real value there. But how much of that is like frontier thinking and then just, resourcing yourself to be able to go out and go to that frontier or discover it and report back?
Yeah, frontier thinking means you're seeing something that you've never seen before and maybe that nobody else has seen before. And you're pursuing it because it seems interesting to you. That's what I try to do in almost every aspect of my life. It's so boring to do something that you've seen other people do. It's not only boring, but often doesn't provide a lot of value and doesn't return a lot of value to you. So yeah, if you're looking to do something easy, then go look what everybody else has done and do that too. I see so much of that on Twitter. It's infuriating.
Well, how do you break out of that? I think people they get lost in that, and like they see somebody that they kind of idolize, and then they start by copying. But how do you? And maybe you have to do that a little bit at first, just to like learn the ropes. But how do you break out of that and lean into yourself at some point?
I think you have to understand it as a principle of thinking, like um, a principle like the golden rule, right? The golden rule sort of makes instinctive sense to us because it maps the idea of empathy to an experience of I am going to be treated the way that I will treat others the way that I want to be treated. I can equate those two things together. Um, I think you can sort of like think similarly about the idea of pioneer thinking and hold it sort of as a foundational principle to say, if I'm copying what somebody else is doing and that's my end game, it's not going to be very good. It's just not. Know that as a foundational principle in your head. I wish they would teach it in preschool. I wish that it was like the golden rule. The golden rule of doing anything is don't copy what somebody else has done. That's not the goal. The goal is to do it in your own way because you're an individual. This sounds so trite coming out of my mouth like this, but I just wish, you know, it's worth saying because there's so much evidence out there on social or whatever, wherever you see people creating stuff, there's so much evidence of copycatting. And it still blows my mind that people think that this is a valid way to proceed in the world.
Yeah. Do you think a lot of it? Do you think a lot of people know that, but a lot of it is just like they don't have the courage required to just step out and maybe take some slings and arrows for doing something a little bit different? Or
It's quite possible that it's a matter of safety, like I was saying before when you asked what creativity is. That if people are copying, it's because they don't feel safe to not copy. Um, I'm a sort of a humanist, progressive person, and I believe that humanity is driving towards a place where more people feel safe. And if humanity is driving towards a place of more safety for more people, then hopefully the effect of that is that more people take risks as an instinct. Um, yeah, but it's so hard to know whether some people are born with it and some people are not, or it's just not taught. Is it nature or nurture? What makes a creative person creative?
okay, well, let's have you teach a little bit here. When you have a client that comes and they're relying on you to bring the creativity. What's your creative process? How do you approach a new project and make sure that you're going to come out on the other side with that creativity?
Sure. The first thing I do is I understand what they're bringing to me. Like I understand it as concepts bolted together so that I can model that understanding for myself and sort of explain it back to myself. As an early example, when Square came before anybody had heard of Square, um, and they said, we have this dongle that you plug into your iPhone's headphone jack and somebody can swipe a credit card. Well, I had to sort of like model that for myself and understand it so that the principles of it made sense to me. Like, why would somebody want that? What problems does it solve? What is a scenario in which somebody would be using it? And what do they get from it? What do they feel? When I have that modeled understanding of it, then there's this interesting process that happens where you take that model of understanding, can be very abstract, and then you translate or convert that model into a different model, which is a story model. A story model, which is, God, these abstractions are absurd, but a story model is like this happens and this happens and this happens, and it reflects exactly the same model of understanding of the concepts in the abstract. So it goes from abstraction to concrete. And in doing that, if you're creating that story model in a way that is authentic to yourself and authentically comes from your own perspective of the world, your own set of experiences, and your own set of values, then that story model is going to it's going to look like something else that you've not seen before.
So do you have like a template? Do you kind of template it, or do you like everything is going to be different no matter what? Like when somebody comes, it's going to be its own thing.
Yeah, no, I don't think it's templated. No, there's no formula, and that's just the thing, is that if you're relying on a formula, you're going to get sameness. If you're relying on a template, things are going to sort of like uh, closely resemble each other. And so I think what it requires is almost like what they call first principles thinking, right? You're not defining a new thing in relation to the thing that came before it. You're defining it by itself. Um, which is a very natural process that happens. You know, humans tell stories, and they come from experiences. They don't necessarily come from other stories. You know, uh, how into AI are you these days?
And that's going to come up, yeah, later. But I want to hear what you have. Let's get into it now. Yeah.
Yeah, well, just mapping it to AI and large language models. Um, Language models are really good at translating one set of concepts to another. And so that's why they feel so human and natural to us. Um, is human brains do what language models do already, which is that we take one model of an understanding and we convert it to another model, or we take one language, we convert it to another language.
Well, yeah. I mean, we're just having a description of like how does someone go about being creative. And what I hear you saying is there is no template. You need to keep it authentic because that is what brings the uniqueness, and it's very story driven.
And it's okay to have a framework, and I think a framework is different from a template. A framework is something that's like acknowledges that things have to have a certain structure in order to hold together and not fall apart. Um, and so I definitely work with a framework for sure. A framework can be something structural, like most of our videos tend to be like 90 seconds long, 2 minutes. Um, the framework can say that it's really helpful when somebody either is using a product or talking to you about using the product. The framework can be that we can see other people reacting to the product, or, you know, and we can project ourselves onto that person. These are like framework kind of dependencies. And I think, um, you know, language has a framework, right? English, we speak English right now. There's a framework for speaking English and language. So we know that within that framework, there's a subject and a verb and an object, and, you know, so this is how we form complete thoughts. I think that the same applies to storytelling. Um, you don't necessarily like say one sentence because it's templated off of a different sentence. You say a sentence because it has meaning and it contains the ideas that you really authentically want to flow out of you. Um, I'm these abstractions again. Like, I'm so sorry for your audience. Like, I'm just like talking in all abstractions right now, but
No, it makes a lot of sense actually. I think people will get that. Well, let's geek out a little bit with the AI. So I'm getting super into that. I know on the entrepreneurial side and the usage side, and I know you are too. Let's start with this. What are some of the AI tools that you're liking using on a daily basis that at this point you wouldn't want to go without?
sure. So my OpenAI API keys, you know, are I don't necessarily use ChatGPT, the product, that often these days. Um, but I use that. I use the API for OpenAI a ton. It is still my favorite model. I know that, you know, Claude is a beast, and incredible.
Not getting into perplexity much.
Oh yeah, very much so into Perplexity, and they're a replete client. Yeah, they're a client of mine. I've made a few things for Perplexity now, um, and I love Perplexity. I use probably Perplexity more often than others, but Perplexity is an application on top of models, right? They don't make their own models. Um, I think that the tool that that I get most value from currently is called Typing Mind. It's something that all my team has access to, and it's a really neat application layer on top of all the models. It allows you to organize your chats, um, do things like create agents, or not agent. They call them agents. They're not really agentic assistants or personas, and then swap out models and do things like system prompting very easily. It's like an incredibly valuable tool. The other thing that I get the most value from is my own startup, is my own tool that I am using now, which is called Useful. It's in stealth mode. We're fundraising right now, but it's sort of like patterned after my own framework of thinking and thought partnership and creative problem solving and productivity. Um, Again, it's not dependent on models. It's model swappable. The tech stack is pretty open.
If you're in stealth, are you able to talk a little bit about it or not quite yet? Yeah. What's the unique selling proposition there? You know, like who's it targeted for and what makes it unique, creative?
Well, it's not in vogue to say this out loud, especially to investors, but it is for everybody because it is a tool for thought partnership. And we use thinking in all aspects of our lives, not just personal or work, you know.
That's a big total addressable market there.
Oh, it's pretty enormous. It's got to be like 9 trillion gazillion. Put that on a pitch deck, right? Well, I helped launch Slack back in the day, and when Slack came out, the first thing that happened was they found an early market in small startups, early adopter, techie, nerdy people. And those people started using it within their small teams where they could use tools like that earlier than enterprise, right? So still B2B, but like B to small b. And the users had such a good experience working with Slack, for as an engine of their team culture or their communications, that they would use it for other things too, right? And then you would be using Slack with you and your buddies to plan a ski trip or something like that. So I think that this idea that work tools and life tools don't converge is old fashioned thinking. I think that they do converge. And ultimately, as we progress towards the world where applications sort of disappear and everything is software, there's not going to be any diversion between work and life tools. I'm sort of building for that future, but it's like one that makes investors uncomfortable a little bit because they're like, what's the use case? Who are your business users? Who are we making money off of? Well, the answer is if you make a really good product, why wouldn't everybody want to use it? Um, so it's basically that, and the problems that it solves are again first principles thinking. You and I know that AI is most useful when it has context of who you are and what you need. And the product challenge is how do you get it context? That's really hard for most people. Most users don't even understand that's what makes it most useful. So we've built a product that makes it really easy for that to happen.
Gotcha. Yeah, I mean, what do you see as mind blowing in the future with AI? I mean, obviously we have people pursuing AGI. We're having agents that are going to pop on the scene real quick, and I don't think a lot of people realize what that's going to mean. Yeah, I mean, like, what are you worried about, if anything? What are you excited about, if anything, about AI in the future?
Yeah, if anything, I'm the most skeptical and slow burn about agentic tech, because I have a staff of 14 people right now. I know the power of trusting somebody to act on your behalf, or having a really great assistant or something, somebody that you trust to interpret what your need is and then take action without you and make the thing happen in a way that you would want it to happen. I haven't really had software do that for me yet. And I think it's going to be a little longer before we can reliably predict, like we can reliably hire software to do things for us. But that's okay because we'll get there for sure. But that's a big leap. That's a big leap to take. And I think it's a similar leap to like how good generative video is right now to how good it has to be in order for a feature film to be produced with compelling characters and believable performance. That's like a multi-year leap. As quick as this stuff is moving, yeah, I think agentic behavior is going to be a little slower. AGI, yeah, I think it's coming fast. I think like we're fractionally there already in a very exciting way. And like if you're somebody who sees to the future, every time you use an LLM, it feels like it's somewhat accomplishing generalized intelligence. These things are so smart, and you have to be a little bit nearsighted to sit down and have a conversation with an LLM conversation with an LLM and think this thing sucks and it's really bad. It always gets answers wrong, and it's basically just a calculator for words.
Yeah, I feel like I may have seen a stat that said something like only 20% of Americans are using something like ChatGPT at the moment, or even know what that is. So like it's still pretty early, and a lot of people they haven't even figured it out, seen the benefit yet. But it's interesting. So what's your take? As someone who runs an Apple channel, and I've talked about apps for a long time, and you're talking about, apps are probably going to go away, and that's probably true. We'll have apps that are just like built on demand, with a voice prompt or something, and then they disappear. So a lot of people on my channel are surprisingly hostile towards AI. And I get that. A lot of people on my channel are like the artist type, and they're mad at Adobe. They, for integrating AI, or they don't want their stuff used in training. And then there was a CEO, I think it was Procreate. I could be wrong. One of the creative apps came out and said, okay, we're not going to integrate AI. And a lot of people were like, thank you, But here's what I want your take on. I feel like when I use AI, it's not replacing me. And I do use it to think a lot, but it doesn't think for me. And I feel like I'm able to leverage it to reflect more of myself out into the world. So you talk about like hiring an employee or something. I haven't hired an employee when I use AI, but yet I'm able to like parcel out the things that I want to do faster and just put myself in, do more. So what's your take? For the people that say like AI is bad, here you are building an AI. Like, what's your take on that?
Oh man, it's so complex and so fun to be a part of this conversation and culture right now. Because you're seeing in real time the people that were afraid of the automobile, and thought, no, we just need a faster horse or whatever it is. I think it's not just a matter of early adopter versus slower to join the conversation. I think some people are going to are going to see the vision and see the opportunity in rougher tools and use those tools for their advantage, like you and me. And some people have a problem with that, have a challenge with that, and they're going to need the tools to be better in order to understand what their power is. I think it's similar to the Vision Pro, right? I'm a big Vision Pro guy. I'm a developer. Some people can put on the device and see into the future because the physical constraints of the device disappear and all they see is a digital reality in front of them. Some people only see the hardware and only feel the constraints. And for those people, the future is not clear yet. And that's okay. Hopefully it'll get there, but it's going to require the product being better, not them joining, getting more accustomed to the rougher version of it currently. I think the same is true with AI and software currently. And like what's fun about that is, to me as an entrepreneur, it's a huge opportunity to make a better tool that people can understand more readily. I think it's a failure of the tool set and the imagination of developers so far that it's only 20% or whatever the number is of, and the number of people who've gotten actual like valuable use from AI is even smaller than that, I would assume. But the tools are going to get way better.
I guess you could sort of like enlarge the thought a little bit. Like I can see where the artist is worried about, oh, if people can just like generate stuff, then I'm not going to get hired or not have it work. Okay. So what if we get to the point where it's like everyone has a sandwich.co in their pocket and it's like you just do the prompt and you know what I mean? So a lot of people are sort of like, hey, in the future, we're going to need universal basic income because everyone's not going to, you're just going to like sit around on your hands or put on the Vision Pro and like zone out because what is there going to be to do? And I have some thoughts on that, but I'm curious what your thoughts on that sort of mentality in the future is going to look like as this gets baked into society everywhere.
Yeah, mostly I believe it to be true. I believe that in 3 years, I probably won't have a video studio anymore. And sort of, I've been sort of building towards that eventuality for the last year and a half, and that's okay with me. Um, we we all, humanity, were part of building this future for ourselves. Like it didn't happen without our permission. Um, yeah, the ethical quandaries of it and the existential quandaries of it are pretty alarming, and I understand why it's threatening. I don't. I talked to Stephen Robles about this on his podcast, but that friend AI, that pendant that came out a month ago. I was part of I did that video. I was part of the launch for it, and I've never seen as much of the conversation around anti AI as there has been since Dolly. I've never seen such anti AI sentiment since that thing came out. And it's because it threatened people on a more existential level than just can it make Photoshop like I do Photoshop, Um, and I think that it speaks to a real fear uh, of will it replace me? And I think that what is required to conquer that fear is a safety in your own existence and a safety in your own originality and potential as a human and a creator. And the knowledge that if you have that safety and confidence, then you'll be able to use the tool and not have the tool replace you. That you'll be able to have a digital friend and not be replaced by the digital friend. Um, so, yeah, it's about confidence and security, really.
I want to zoom in a little bit on what you said there. This is a theme that's come up several times in these conversations for this series is knowing that you need to head in a new direction and taking that leap when you're headed down a path, and especially when things are going good. It's pretty remarkable actually to have some foresight and be like, actually I need to shift gears and plan for the future a little bit. So what did that process look like for you? Like when did you realize, oh, I may need to do something else, and in fact I'm going to do something, start that, tip over the first domino.
Yeah, it's interesting because I've been working with AI companies for a long time, just doing as video clients. Um, but they were always kind of like they always felt pre Chat GPT, pre Dolly. They felt like a little bit gimmicks. They felt like a cool magic trick. But it was when they sort of passed that Turing test for me of like, oh, I just held a conversation with a piece of software. That was when it started to become a little bit of a wake up call. And so I sat down with my team and I said, we all need to know about these tools. We need to know because we're going to be working with these companies and we're going to help tell their stories. And also, in likelihood, we're going to be using these tools to make our creative work. And in all likelihood, some of these tools are going to replace us and they're going to affect our business, So let's be aware of it. I want to hear what everybody thinks about it, and a lot of that fear came out, from my team. But like we couldn't just put on blinders; we had to move forward. And so most of my team is pretty comfortable with it now. One of the things that I did was I signed up for a team account of that platform or that tool that I mentioned before, and now everybody on my team has access to the high quality models with the largest context windows, and they can. I don't know how many of them are using them. I don't get transparency into their usage of them, but hopefully they are. And I know that some of my team are using them incredibly well. Like my VP of accounts, Lauren, she's like, she basically consults with an expert of her own devising for every strategic decision. And we're sharing these conversations back and forth with each other all the time and helping us strategize what's the right decision to make. Now, that's an incredible use of the tool. Um, I think of it more as like knowledge management or thought partnership. And I think everybody should be using it for that at a baseline. Everybody should be using it for knowledge management.
I got you. Now, this is funny. I'm sure people are sick of me saying this because I feel like a parrot. I'm just putting this out there all the time. But I feel like AI is kind of like a superpower, right? Especially when you pick up an LLM for the first time, you're like, wow, got new powers. But if everybody has the superpower, then nobody's a superhero, I guess you could say, right? Because
Yeah,
then
that's
you're
in
all
The
like back to equal
Incredibles.
with that. Is it? Okay. Well, I ripped that off, I guess. But here's the thing.
It's okay. Incredibles one, or I think it's in The Incredibles two. I think, but
Oh well, I never saw that, so.
oh, you should see it. It's
but
great.
but my point is though, like, I feel like there is something to the person putting the tool to work still. Like, yes, anyone technically they can go sign up for any of these different accounts or whatever. But it's like there's a bit of the analogy you see a lot is being the conductor of something. And there is something to that. Even with Claude and Cursor, which everyone's getting into, it's not just like, hey, do this, and it goes and builds the app. Like, you still got to spend it. You have to have the interest. You got to go, like, learn it a little bit. And it's going to take time and effort. And you know what I mean? So there is, like, the applied side to the AI, I feel like. And I don't feel like just because this stuff is floating around out there, it's just automatically going to be an upgrade for everybody. Like, you still have to have the desire and go learn it. You know what I mean?
Oh, absolutely. Some people are going to be good managers, and some people are not.
So how does this affect?
Go ahead.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, if I take on a project, I kind of have to have a vision of what the completion is going to look like, and I have to have a good frame of understanding the process in order to get there. And that's how I'm going to apply management to getting it done. Whether I have to manage people to do that or I have to manage software to do that. And like, make no mistake, the software is going to be way, way, way better at interpreting our own intentions so that we don't have to necessarily all be great managers. Right now, good AI is for good managers. And pretty soon, I think good AI is going to be for everybody, whether or not you're a good manager.
Interesting. So how does a big part of what we cover here is just like productivity, people's processes. I guess we really spent a lot of this conversation talking about AI, but what does productivity look like then in the future? Do you think that you're talking about that management, but what does it look like? Getting stuff done.
Sure. I think the done part is the important part. That's the key word, right? I think that the loop between need and result is going to shorten and shorten and shorten and shorten. And that's been the promise of technology from the very beginning, is the gap between my intention and my outcome is getting shorter. The tools or the layers of abstraction between my intention and my result are going to decrease. And what we've gotten in the past year and change of AI software in that process has been an exponential lift of shortening of that loop. So yeah, I'm like you. Like, I believe that applications are basically going to go away. Like, I need and then I have is going to be very, 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 very short, and which is great. That's productivity, honestly, because right now in our work culture, what makes it so painful, the reason why most people would report hating their job is because these loops are way too long and too complex, and the tools get in the way. And so I think builders are sort of building towards a future where the tools don't get in the way. and that is productivity. And you know, economies are driven by productivity. Um, if everybody is like newly empowered to be productive, probably that's going to be a net win for society in the form of economic gains.
Yeah, I have this conversation with people all the time, and people have very different takes on it. But it's like, do you feel like, we live in a world where there's different nations, right? And there's so much interplay between the nations, but yet the nations still want what's best for them. And like, if someone took our grid off, right, offline, that would be devastating, right? And if everyone becomes so dependent on AI and stuff, that becomes like, ironically, I talked to this guy from the FBI several years ago. He contacted me with this unknown number, and he was like, "I'm worried about people sabotaging our sewer systems and all these things that no one ever thinks of. But if we become so dependent on this, we actually, being America, have made it almost easier to attack us, the vector, in some ways, because we're so online. You know what I mean? So in the future, where we have like Neuralink implants and stuff." Is it all good? I guess that's what I'm heading towards here. Is it all good, or do we need to be measured about the adoption? You know what I mean? What's your feeling on that?
I don't know. It seems my feeling is a little bit catastrophic, because what you're talking about is we've evolved ourselves to become a body that is entirely dependent on these metaphors of our physiology, our central nervous system, our main processor, our brain. Like, what we're doing is reforming ourselves into a body. And yeah, it's true that if you take one big organ away from that body, especially one of the most, the most important ones, then the body's going to die. So what keeps bodies alive is probably going to be the same as what keeps a society that's driven by technology alive.
Well, it's crazy though, right? Because at this point, I don't know what's going on the government level, but you would think you have China pursuing their AGI version or whatever it looks like. Russia, America. Is it going to come down to who has the most power to power their super intelligent AI, and you have the edge? Oh, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah, well, I think it's like nuclear warfare, right? It's mutually assured destruction. I think at this point we all know that if one superpower existentially threatens another superpower, it's bad for all of us. I know, so those are the rules of warfare, right? I think that's just how we're going to have to continue to go on.
let's go back and dig into your story a little bit, because we got sidetracked on this fun conversation about AI. But was there a time when you were getting started, going down, you were like a creative guy, and all of a sudden you found yourself an entrepreneur? What was the moment when you're like, I'm gonna make it. This is good. The direction I'm heading is working out. And what did that feel like?
Well, the easy answer is anytime early on that I'd put out a video and people would get really excited, not just about the work, but about the product. And then that became a flywheel for bringing in more new clients. And like, this just felt like the right proof of a business case where you can create value and then others recognize that value and come back and ask you to create more value. That's what a business wants. And it all happens because you created something good. That's the easy answer, is just like making good work, and it begets more good work. Of course, there has to be a market there for good work, to be created. And I'm not sure that market is the same as it always was. Definitely for most of the company's history, it's been really strong markets, but everything's being disrupted right now, not just by AI. Um, um, so many of my production friends in LA are out of work, and it's just, what a strange time. That's a separate discussion, but I think probably a less intuitive answer is the first time. So I had hired somebody. I'd hired my first employee. He's still with me. It's been 13 years, I think, 12, 13 years. I had hired him sort of just like as a right hand. He had come from a film school. He was real smart, loved tech. And the first time that I was like, I had too much on my plate to direct everything, and it was a smaller job. And So I decided, let's throw this his way and see if he can do sort of like a mini version of what I've done with all my client projects. And when he did that and he brought in his resources and the project went phenomenally well, I think that was an indicator. That was like, oh wow, now I'm more than myself. Then it was early signs of a studio model. And a studio is anything that scales up a creative force of value. So that's how I became one, a studio of one to a studio of many.
Okay, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Did you have a hard time at all? Because I know other creators I've talked to have, dealing whenever you bring somebody else into the equation, there's like editorial decisions getting made, and it's not going to be like the way that you would have done it if you did it all yourself. Was that an easy transition? Was it tough?
It's still tough, honestly. Like I'm up till very recently, I've been for 15 years super in creative control of everything. Um, Up to the very end of the post production process. Uh, and if you really care about the work, you have to do that. You can't just let it go. Um, but the outcome of that is putting a team in place that really knows like the value system of who we are as a studio and what kind of creative decisions we make and why. And so then that means that I can sort of step away more and they can make those decisions. And they might not be exactly the same decisions as I would have made, but I know that they're going to be good. They're going to be great. They're not going to be just good enough. And that honestly, that ends up being the metric more often than not is, did somebody decide this is good enough? We don't have to work on this anymore at the right time. Did they abandon the creative perfection before it should have been abandoned? And like that's the number one lesson for any creative purpose is like give a damn until you don't until you're satisfied.
Yeah, interesting. Okay. Did you ever have a time in your career when, man, it was just like you hit a brick wall and it was a huge obstacle that was hard to overcome? And if so, what did you do to get around that? What was the mentality? What got you through?
I wish I had a great answer to this right now because most of my blocking has come in the form of rejection. Like when when you're doing client work, you're constantly asking for permission and you're constantly asking for validation and for the people with resources and need to believe that you have value. And it's easy. It was easier for me early on because I had proven my value repeatedly and like, had a strong portfolio and a reputation and had developed a brand so that clients would believe it more frequently. But if I'm being honest with you right now, like I'm in a position as a CEO trying to fundraise a seed startup where I have not validated myself in that way before. So I'm coming up against a lot more uh, uh, disbelief, skepticism. Oh yeah, you did that thing, but that doesn't mean you can do this thing. And I think for me, that's been the biggest block is like, when you're doing creative work, creative video work, let's say for clients, and you write a script, and then you have to, in order to sell that script through to the client, they have to believe in your version of that of executing that script. And instead, what they often do is they only see their version. They read the script and they have the most boring, terrible version of executing that script in their head. So they're like, yeah, I think it's going to be boring and terrible. And you're like, no, so it's like, it's hard to move past that. So that can be a block.
So how do you deal with it? Is it fuel? Is it fuel for you when you have people push back? Or is it, I mean, like, what do you do with that rejection?
You have to use it as fuel. I guess you have to use it as motivation. Does it feel good? Like, is it fuel in the sense that it energizes? I guess so. Not in a um, sadistic way, or not sadistic, masochistic way, but in a way that I think it presents another challenge to be solved. Like, I was on a VC call this morning, and he told me various reasons not to believe, right? And now I'm going to interpret those reasons not to believe, and I'm going to transform them into reasons to believe. And I'm going to do that by adjusting my approach. Uh, so I guess you have to do that in all work. You have to do it. If somebody tells you they don't believe you, you have to give them a reason to believe you. Um, yeah, and I guess the same can apply.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt. I was just gonna say, I know for me dealing with some investors also, for me it's like, man, just have the right partner, because there's been a couple meetings where it's like I couldn't do this and I knew I couldn't, and I was just like, this is your department. And it was like watching, I got this business partner, man, like watching Michael Jordan, and we had this investor, and he started out kind of running the meeting, and then all of a sudden my business partner's like, so tell us about your fund, and he like flipped it, and the dude's like pitching us all of a sudden. I'm like, whoa. He's like, yeah, send me your PPM, and like, and he's like, I don't want to look over eager, let's not. And it's just like he completely reversed. And that's why I love having these sorts of conversations, because you learn so much from other people, and you don't know what you don't know until you encounter. That's why I try to increase my surface exposure to other interesting people. But in my case, like just having the right partner, and sometimes that can, I think, sometimes be AI even, because it's experienced everything in human history, basically, it has that knowledge, and you can tap into it. You think?
Yeah, absolutely. I love it, and I use AI for that in that way as well, to help me think through these challenges and help me make sense of every pitch that went well or didn't go well. But it hasn't. I can't use AI to upskill myself. Like I would like I don't know. First of all, hold on to that partner, that business partner that's able to do that. I think the talent and skill to pitch convincingly in a meeting is different from the talent and skill that comes naturally to me, which is premeditating and forming a story, like a concise story. Um, I can express myself well, but I can't say the things that they want to hear. I can't speak their language necessarily, and it's frustrating to me that I'm supposed to have both those abilities, even though fundraising is its own like separate journey. Like, why can't I just hire a fundraiser to do this on my behalf? But I understand it.
It's funny, yeah. I mean, people are so different, and that's why having a team of some sort, even if it's just like a partnership of two, or like a team like you built at Sandwich, can be so valuable. But let's, as we start to wrap this up, tell me what's some of your best advice, that you wish someone had told you maybe 15 years ago. Like, what's the most important thing that no one, and maybe it's advice that goes contrary to what people are often hearing. But what's the one thing that you want to leave people with?
Mm. Well, this really awesome guy in 2018, I met him at a conference called XOXO in Portland. And he was the founder of an Icelandic founder of a design company called Wayno. It was eventually acquired by Twitter. And then when Musk took over, notoriously fired him. And then they got into a big public dispute, and it was hilarious. But this founder, Holly, had tons of client experience, had been doing it for a long time. One of the most renowned design firms, did such tasty work. He and I got into a conversation about working with clients, and he said his life kind of changed when he had a realization about working with clients, that your job is not only to produce the best work, it's also to create a really good experience for your clients, and create a process that is as much of the product as the final output. And I think I'd always been thinking of clients in a different way, as the antagonists in the process. I always thought that I was working against them, that I was the one who knew and they were the ones who didn't know how to do good work. And I often took on a very um, pugilistic approach to working with clients, where I would have to defend my ideas with, to the death. And I would get so butthurt about these bad decisions that they were making, and I would take it personally. And then I realized a couple of things that, number one, most importantly, is it's just commercials. It doesn't ultimately matter at the end of the day. But number two, you can make a really positive change for your lifestyle and your client's experience of working with you if you're more collaborative and more accepting of outside opinions. And what I started to realize, based on this advice, was that the client can help make the work better if you're open to it. So that was a big one. That was a big shift for me.
Yeah, because I assume I don't. It's been a long time since I've been in like an agency sort of setting, but I assume there's a lot of agencies that sort of manage their clients and try to make them feel heard, but then do like whatever they want to. I assume so. Yeah, that probably has a huge impact if somebody's encountering these different creative teams, to feel like someone is buying in, but also adding to that and making it successful. So that's really good advice there. Yeah.
Yeah, I liked it. And client management can be such a huge ordeal, and there are entire departments at traditional agencies whose only job is to make the client feel like they're being listened to, even if they're not being listened to. But what I've found is that for a creative company like ours, as the technology progresses, then you actually want to be working in tandem with the client. You don't want to manage them. You want to work with them, and you want to do that by collaborating in new technologically enabled ways, like getting everybody in a Slack channel together, being in a Slack channel with a client. And actually, the pandemic ended up being a huge enabler of this, where it used to be that you'd be on set and your client would fly in, or and they'd be on set with you and they'd be sitting there making their comments or whatever. But when all production suddenly had to be remote and the clients would be on Zoom, we just got into this cadence of like there's more constant iterative access. And I love that the tools enabled that based on a time of constraint and need. And I think that those principles have just like flourished and applied towards a new mode of working together with clients.
That's so interesting. It's weird. There's all this advice floating around, and oftentimes it's like, I've heard that so many times. But if you can create this win-win scenario, and because it's not normal. Like I did this, a very, very, very simple example was I had this series on the channel, and it was like the best apps, like that's probably what I'm best known for, discovering and sharing the best apps, especially iPad apps. Those are the videos that I have that have millions of views. And I used to like just hunt and peck and save stuff up forever till there was enough to share that made a really great video. And then one day I was like, hey, if you're a developer, send me your apps. And then I just had a wave of stuff pour in because it's a win for them. They want the exposure. It's a win for me because I get to share stuff. It's a win for my audience because then they get to see. And when you've created that win-win scenario because things like flow like magic. So that's a very simple example, but you can do that in business, in your creative process. Like there's just nothing like it. When you are making everyone successful, then everyone's bought in and things just flow. So no, that makes so much sense.
Aligning incentives and combining resources in magical ways, and it ends up being an exponential lift. There's nothing like that.
Yep, definitely. Well, hey, we could probably talk for a lot longer. This has been such a great conversation. Thank you for the gems. We have a tradition at the end here. It's called the Chain of Creativity. You've been part of it because Steven brought you in. You're part of Steven's chain. Who's somebody that you'd like to see on the podcast? It's in your personal network that you wouldn't mind making an invite to.
My friend Stefan Engo is the CEO of Obsidian. If you know Obsidian, the personal knowledge managed. Yeah. He's great. He and I shared an office space when we were both baby companies at his previous startup. He's one of my favorite people. Super smart. He's been a former podcaster, so I'd probably introduce you to Stefan.
Very cool. Well, Adam, thanks so much for taking the time.
Thank you very much. This was fun, Chris.